Good evening, Canterbury. Welcome to this NewsMakers Extra. Well, it's been an action-packed first year in office for the National-led government as they have navigated their way through the throes of recession. And as the year draws to a close, we thought it was timely to take stock on some of the defining issues. And it's a pleasure to welcome aboard Senior Minister and Ilam MP, Gerry Brownlee. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mike.
A pleasure. We will start with the changes that are pending for the power sector. It's been a priority for you, and you have expressed your confidence that these changes will bend the arc on price rises. What guarantees, though, can you give that relief is on its way?
Well, I think you've got to look at what's happened over the last 10 years, that massive 70% price rise for domestic consumers, a similar amount for commercial consumers, and a much lesser amount for industrial consumers. But nonetheless, rises that are well above the long-term marginal cost of electricity generation. And what we need to do is get that, as you put it quite eloquently, I thought, the curve bent back the other way just a bit, so that over the next 10 years or so we don't see that same runaway sort of cost. And I think the suite of measures that we've put up in the bill that'll be read in the House for the first time next week should be able to contain some of those points where things got a little bit out of control.
How will you measure the success or otherwise of these reforms?
Well, we look at the average power price all the time.
Yep.
And I get regular reports on that. And so we'll be monitoring that. We'll be looking at I suppose on an annualised basis exactly what sort of offerings are out there in the retail market. So I'd love it if the switching, for example, was much quicker than the 3 days that we hope to get it down to. Currently it's around about between 23 and 30 days to switch power companies. I'd like to see that down to a much quicker switch, so that much as you might decide on the specials in the grocery line, you might decide on which bit of power you're going to have, or who's going to supply your electricity in a particular time period. So getting much more awareness about the competitive side of it is important as well.
Sure. On the price front, though, given the recent track record has been power prices to be averaging 3 times the rate of inflation, what would be acceptable in your eyes? On par with the rate of inflation? Would that
somewhere around that is probably more acceptable. It's hard to argue against that, because that does reflect real costs and operation cost of capital, etc. It would also be a factor in there, but I think somewhere around that would be much more acceptable than 3 times the rate. Yeah.
All right. So if power tracks double the rate of inflation over the next couple of years, would we consider that a failure on your part with your reforms?
Well, I think what I'd be expressing is exceptional disappointment, but we'd also be looking at what else we have to do. I think the problem has been that we had the reforms of the late 90s, so 1999 in fact, the same year as the election. Everyone has got a particular view on who was responsible for that. But for the next 9 years, very little changed. All we had was a bit of tinkering around the edges, the establishment of the Electricity Commission, which we all paid for as consumers, and really no encouragement for a more competitive market to develop. And so you had 2 things that worked in favour of the generators putting up the prices so high. One is they continually said we've got a shortage of electricity.
Yeah.
They created 3, they asked us to conserve electricity on 3 occasions during that 9-year period. And also then there's, I have to say, a little bit of apathy on the part of the consumer, because we don't tend to look at what is the best tariff for us in our household. Most people just get the bill and get a bit of a shock, but they pay it and let it go for another month. There's a bit of work to be done in getting consumers more engaged in their power purchases as well.
Just a quick question about the asset swapping, Meridian's outlook. Are you bothered that under this asset swapping proposal, Meridian's much vaunted carbon neutral credentials are going to be trashed?
No, I have no concern about that whatsoever, because they are going to be still a renewable generator. They've got the vast bulk of the hydro system in New Zealand, and they have now a considerable amount of wind energy as well. The problem with wind is that when it stops blowing, you can get a lot of load being picked up from the wind turbines. When that drops off, someone else has to pick it up. So even if you're connected to Meridian, there will be many, many times where the electricity that you're purchasing has been generated from either gas or coal. So I think Meridian picking up the Whirinaki plant,
yes,
which they can operate as a peaker. I'm not going to tell them how to use their operation. I'm just observing what's happened over a period of time. It's going to be a much more stable operation.
The boss of this new retailer, Power Shop, Ari Sargent, is claiming that the reshuffle of generation assets could lead to higher prices. And he argues that forcing Meridian to hand over what Tekapo A and B to Genesis is risky because Tekapo control the flow of the water through the entire Waitaki system, and there is potential here for Genesis to game the release of water to the Meridian stations further down the river. True or false?
Well, I think it's just alarmist nonsense, and you've got to be clear on one thing, and that is that Power Shop is a 100% owned subsidiary of Meridian.
You think that might be a factor here?
Mr. Sargent sits up there next to the chief executive of Meridian, and you can tell me there hasn't been a bit of whispering between the walls.
All right.
I think Meridian need to take stock of themselves and participate in a very, very constructive way in the select committee process and in a cooperative fashion. The chief executive has said that's what they'll do, but this sort of shonky arrangement with this whoever this guy is completely unacceptable, and we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to haul them in and have a crack at them, but we know what the game is. I think it's completely disreputable, and I say that about Meridian. I think allowing that is just reprehensible. It's
very strong language from the Minister. All right, just a quickie on mining. I know that we're not going to do justice to the possibilities here, but just a couple of quick questions. Do you rule out any chance of mining in national parks?
Well, what people need to understand is that there are 82 mines inside the conservation estate now.
What about national parks?
Well, Paparoa is where the Park River is.
Right.
Yes, it does happen.
What about new mining?
There could be new mining.
In national parks?
Quite possibly. What we have said is, and I want to qualify that because it sounds like it's, dig it all up and turn it all over. What we have said is we want a detailed stock take of firstly what minerals are there, secondly of what the conservation values are in those parks. We are not about to destroy the credentials of New Zealand's national park system. Far from it. And there will be areas where there are minerals that will say no, it's a no-go. The conservation values are far too high.
Would you rule out mining in a World Heritage area, like Fiordland?
Well, I'm not going to rule anything in or out until we receive the document that is currently being worked on by both DOC and
MED,
Crown Minerals. I've seen drafts, I have to say,
right.
And we're working through that. But we want to, whatever we do, we've said when we've decided on what the document looks like, we're going to put it out for public consultation before there is any cabinet decision making.
All right. And just before we go to the break, to clarify the time frame, the stock take report will go to cabinet early next year?
I would hope in the first quarter next year,
okay.
yes.
And then
it will go out to consultation, and we would expect the decision about what might be possible around about maybe August. Question from the Green Party: will you dismember the Mount Aspiring National Park? No, I think it's really quite extraordinary, and it tends to, that whole issue around Mount Aspiring tends to show how difficult all this is, because we want a dispassionate look. Tell us what's there. And then once we know what's there, we want a very public consideration of what to do about it. All right. This sort of thing where you get, it was leaked, it was supplied to under an arrangement with one group. They let it out to some people that they felt they need to consult with, and then of course it made its way back around to the Green Party. Yes. Now, if the Green Party want to go and sort of engage in that sort of exercise, that I think just also destroys the integrity and the very public process that we want to have once we know what we're doing. All right. Closing the gap with the Land of Oz. We'll have a look at that next. Do stay with us.